Good morning. Welcome to our session on RPA and complete automation. I'm here, in the words of Nigel Tufnells from This Is Spinal Tap, to tell you how to take RPA to 11. So if anyone's familiar with that, an amplifier goes to 10. He labeled them 11 to say that he could take his amplifiers to 11. We're going to do that with RPA today. We're going to show you how a complete automation approach to RPA is a better RPA. My name is Kevin Visco. I'm the group product lead for process automation in RPA at Appian. I've been working with RPA and process automation for over 8 years. I led several RPA COEs before I came to Appian, including Procter & Gamble, where we automated brand management processes, and then I worked at Amazon, where we automated HR and payroll operations processes. And I want to get started with having experience actually implemented RPA processes. I can say that when you have the right process, the right task, the right use case, RPA is fantastic. You can generate a lot of savings, a lot of benefits, but it does have its limits and it begins to break. And so there are challenges that persist with using RPA by itself or using an RPA-only kind of platform. One of the biggest challenges is scale. If you're thinking about complex processes or automating end-to-end, as I mentioned, ideal tasks fit well with RPA, but sometimes in your process, there's these funny things called people that need to interact with your process. There's other systems with different capabilities. Some have API, some have UI. So RPA does work well for a specific task, but it can begin to be difficult to scale, and that can result in failures. One thing that we want to really emphasize when we're thinking about RPA and Appian is that Appian's not an RPA platform. We are a complete automation platform, of which RPA is one of the capabilities within that platform, right? So we have a platform that allows you to design, to automate, and to optimize those processes, and to do that in an end-to-end fashion. Yes, RPA is a big part of that, and it provides a very strategic kind of capability when you need to automate a UI system, but it's a fully integrated low-code capability that works really well with all our other capabilities. It allows us to focus RPA on what it does best, on those manual, highly repetitive UI automation features. So we can use all the other capabilities of Appian and bring those in without having to force RPA to do the things it doesn't do as well. And there are some key things that you really said that I really want to emphasize: the idea of orchestration, integration, end-to-end. And that's the advantage that we have using the orchestration through our workflow, right? So we're not using RPA to orchestrate the automation. Automation is orchestrated through our process modeler, through our workflow. And that allows you to take a much more modular end-to-end approach to your automation. Yes, you can use RPA. You can use RPA in multiple instances. You see here in this example process, RPA is being used several times within the workflow, but we also have humans in the loop here in this workflow. We also have an integration with Salesforce that is part of this workflow. This orchestration allows you to take a much more modular or composable approach to your automation, as opposed to thinking I've got to fit it all into the way RPA wants to work or wants to handle that task. You can do re-engineering to optimize your process, or you can bring in RPA as is for that particular task and then begin to evolve your process. The other thing that's important to note is we also use the same low-code capabilities with RPA. Fully integrated, meaning that when you use our RPA Designer, you're going to see a lot of familiar interfaces and capabilities. So in many cases, you may, if you haven't used RPA, you may say this looks a lot like the Interface Designer. And it also brings in parameters and variables, expressions, rules, other components that allows you to make these components reusable. Reuse them in one part of your process, reuse them in another part of your process. But one of the other things that's pretty interesting, and you'll see in an example before and after here I'll show in just a few minutes, is that also means that you just need one developer, an Appian developer who's familiar with Appian, to learn the RPA capabilities. You don't need another skill set to learn another platform and figure out how to integrate that platform. So reusability, one developer through this gives you that advantage. So RPA doesn't just work with Appian platform, it is fully and tightly integrated into our platform. And you're going to see even more integration with RPA in the year ahead, including single package deployment with RPA, new design object, RPA design object, new robots, new capabilities. This integration can be done in your workflow or in RPA itself. So you can create a rule or an expression and call that in RPA, or as you saw before, have that in your process modeler. So this allows you to decompose your RPA automations and again, focus RPA so it is doing the task that it's optimized for. So this is a very high level example of an actual process that I automated in a previous employer with a previous unmentioned RPA platform. And any of us in RPA COEs here, anyone who actually uses RPA, I'm curious, a few. We kind of take pride when we can bring together all these tools and make them work in an end-to-end automation. And we're like, yes, it's amazing, we can build this. And then guess what we have to do? We have to maintain it and operate it, right? And that's where the problems start to kind of show up. So in this case, this is a payroll auditing process that audits HR events to make sure people are getting paid for HR events, like a training event. So this was a process to automate that. So if they had a training in the HR system, we made sure they had the correct pay code with the correct pay amounts. And it consisted of different steps and different systems. We had to integrate with the HR system, which had read-only APIs. It had some APIs to read, but didn't have write APIs. And then there was a whole bunch of data rules around those pay codes, and RPA didn't have that capability. The platform that we had couldn't do that. So we were creating these pay codes, the rules, outside using what I call high code or programmatic automation, SQL, Python scripts, right? So we had to have that being done, and that created a data file. We dumped that data file into a shared drive. RPA picks up that file from the shared drive, right? And then sends that file, processes that into that HR system using write updates. And then the exceptions get put into another data file, into another Excel file, and it gets sent to our users via email. And this was a typical way to kind of bring the RPA capabilities on certain parts of the process, but we couldn't have it do other parts of the process. So we had to do all this integration on our own, bring that together. But that caused problems, right? First off, I need a different skill set. Remember I talked about just having an Appian developer? I now need someone that knows SQL and Python. Is that file there on time? What happens to RPA when the file's not there? Does RPA have the judgment to wait? No, it's going to fail, and it's going to send messages to our support team to go find out where that file is. The file could have errors. The exception handling is not ideal. So this was not an ideal way of using RPA and the strengths of RPA, because RPA was doing really well at its portion, but then we had all these other parts that were starting to fail. So take that same process, put that into Appian using a process model, right? We now have a way to bring this all in one process. That way we can monitor it truly end to end. We can add humans into the process for the exceptions. So when we generate exceptions, we use a user task that uses an interface. We could also take that another step further, where if there's a lot of exceptions and all they need is a simple yes or no or approval, then those could be then sent back to the process model to be reprocessed with another RPA. We can bring in another bot into the process. We can improve it even further. I mentioned that HR system has read capability, right? So we can actually read the data from HR. Let's use an API for that, because it'll read with the API, and then we'll just use RPA to write. So we're narrowing what RPA is doing. We're making it more focused, easier to manage, fewer exceptions, and a much more robust process. So let me highlight here just three kind of components of this solution, the after here, in the time we have. There's obviously a lot of benefits that we can talk about today, but I really want to highlight what I think are three powerful ones. First, the human piece of it, the interaction with people and tasks, right? You hear this concept, who's heard the term human in the loop, right? Now, humans are in control in Appian. They're not in the loop. You actually can integrate them fully into your process, as I mentioned, back and forth, not just from the exception handling side, but let's not forget about how to trigger a process, right? Sometimes we used to take a process and create a schedule and queue out of it, but it really was triggered by humans, but we had no way for the humans to trigger that process. So what we did was kind of created this arbitrary schedule, but you can use our capabilities like sites and portals to trigger a process model, which then in turn runs RPA, right? So they can be anywhere in your process, fully in control of that process and give you that capability. Data. The data is not these files that are being passed around, right? The data is fully integrated using the data fabric concept that you've heard, right? You can use your records, you create connected systems to pull that data in. You have more control of that data. If there's issues with data in your process, you have a better idea where those issues could potentially happening. It's fully integrated using data integration with RPA. And then it also, I mentioned the whole composability and modular approach, reusing components, put the business rules outside of RPA into expressions or rules. That allows, again, RPA is very lean. It's just going into the user interface of a site. Well, what happens if you want a quick win now with RPA, right? So you've gone to the system, dependent system owners, and they've said, we don't want you using RPA, we want you to have an API. We'll build you an API, it'll take 12 months. You get permission to, at least for now, use RPA. So you can use RPA to get the benefits for now, because guess what? When does that API arrive? Not in 12 months, 24 months. So it's usually you're still waiting for that API, but you're still getting value from RPA. But because you've made your business rules and the interfaces and everything outside of the RPA in that smart service, later on, I just replace that RPA with API. Right? As long as I've got the same inputs and outputs and they match the endpoint of that API, it makes your upgradability, your transformation, win with RPA today, transform that process later with more connected systems when they're available. Hopefully we kind of talked to you about how we think the complete automation approach to RPA is a better approach. It makes for a better RPA. It makes it more focused. It does what it does best, and it works really, really well within the Appian platform. So we definitely want you to try it because you see the benefits you get from this, thinking a more modular, complete automation approach, using RPA where you need it, not having to go to a separate organization for an RPA platform, but basically using RPA in Appian, using it within the workflow that you have, and showing you all those advantages that integration gives you with using that approach. So to get you started, if you are interested in RPA and complete automation, we do have a formal program in Appian that you can work with your Appian counterpart with called the Automation Kickstart Program. And this is a fantastic program because it's free, right? So everything that's free is great, especially in days of inflation, right? The inflation went from free to free. So this allows you to actually have CS experts, product manager assigned to you, that will help you with that use case that you have, that RPA use case, and get the most out of Appian. And then, of course, that will give you a lot of learning and insight as you then rapidly, hopefully, build more and more complete automation cases and do that within the Appian platform. So highly encourage you to take advantage of this program if you do have RPA use cases, and we can help you on your journey to use Appian, RPA, and complete automation. So we do have some time for questions, so let's go ahead and open that up, and hopefully we can help you out here. And if we run out of time for questions, I'll just let you know I'll be outside for a few minutes after the session, so feel free to walk right up to me and grab me and ask a question.
Hi. Could you elaborate a bit more on data integration and RPA, like a potential business use case or a problem it may solve?
Yeah, I mean, so the data integration can happen in multiple ways, right? There's obviously a lot of smart services in Appian that allow you to use data. So we've seen some customers building records and CDTs to basically create elaborate queues to basically monitor their process and track how the results of their process is and follow up on exceptions. And so they'll create all of that data, and then they'll call it through smart services and then pass those data records on to RPA to process that data in the system. And then the outputs that come back from RPA, they'll update the records again using a smart service. Other ways you can do it is more lean. If you just want RPA to use data in like entering data like pay records, as I mentioned. So if you're going through time cards and entering pay codes, you could have those records in outside of RPA and just pass the key ID, the identifier, and then within an expression within Appian, you could just call that data, right? So you could read the data and then use that data in RPA. So there's multiple ways that, I mean, when I say the data is fully integrated, all the data capabilities that exist today in the Appian platform can be used by RPA in different ways on how you feel that data is used in your process. The nice thing there is, again, it's not being done using data files or abstracts or share drives. You're fully integrated in it. And you may even today be using some file that's being sent, but maybe there's a capability like a connected system that you can connect to that, create a record for that, and now you could start reading that data in RPA instead of today having that file being sent from you. right? And a lot of times that's what you do. You say, well, I don't have a way to connect to that data system, so I'm just going to have the data provider send me the file, and then I'll upload it into RPA. Well, there could be errors with that, right? So this allows you to fully integrate the capabilities of, so all the data smart services that are there in your process model, you can fully use those and leverage those. But because you can also call rules and expressions, you can also manipulate and call data within RPA. Yeah, good question. Yes.
Thank you. I would be glad to hear your thoughts around how do you help your customers who have, let's say, an RPA COE to transform it into a complete automation COE, so the people that enable that sort of journey?
That's a pretty good question. I think the best way for that is to bring a use case that you may have that you think probably could be a good use case for Appian. Maybe it already has a lot of integrations or interfaces in, and then as part of the Kickstart program, if they're a part of that program, of those stakeholders, so we've had customers that brought their COE in along with the business partners, and we've worked through them with the Kickstart program, and when they begin to see how we implement RPA and a complete automation capability, they begin to have ideas on how they set that up and how they find a better way to do that. Now, I can certainly afterwards, you can come up to, I'll give you some advice and over the years of how I've tried to transform. Even at Amazon, we called it the RPA COE, and we said we don't want to be RPA COE because we don't want to limit to just RPA, and how do we transform into a complete automation COE, bring in other areas and other thoughts around AI especially, right? Thinking about AI. But as far as I think the Automation Kickstart program is probably the best way to do that. What use cases do you have today in your RPA COE that could probably benefit from more integration? Or maybe you're already sending info back and forth to an Appian application. Maybe if you bring that in as a potential use case, we could look at that and say, you know what, if you just did this RPA in Appian, this would be a much better approach, and here's how we can improve it. We haven't gone to yellow yet, so we have time for another question. Yeah.
We have facing some issues like multi-factor authentications in RPA. Is that Appian RPA have the features to work with multi-factor authentication?
Multi-factor authentication, no, not really. Now, talk to me afterwards. I can tell you about a few. The thing is, ultimately, multi-factor authentication was intended to basically verify that a person's the right person that's logging in there, right? So it's interesting because I could translate this question as, can you tell me how to bypass my security requirements for multi-factor authentication using RPA? I don't want to tell you how to do that, right? There are ways to do that, though. Depending on the authentication and if it's okay with your security group, there are ways you could potentially do that. But we don't have a built-in multi-factor authentication capability.
I'm asking, like, while running RPA, interacting with the human again and do some authentication and then...
Right, and that's one, like if you have a software authentication, then RPA could potentially be used for that. We did have a customer who had that potential use case. But again, you have to be very careful about that because there's a reason why they've put that multi-factor authentication in there. Usually what we've done in the past, in my previous COE experience, is we go to, again, whoever owns that system to see if there's another account that doesn't require multi-factor authentication, right? There's different API logins that have more security, and they could potentially give you that doesn't require multi-factor, or they can give you a system account that you're allowed to log in with that doesn't have multi-factor. So usually the best solution is to start working with that system owner, whoever owns that system, that you're trying to see if there's other alternatives besides multi-factor that would allow you to do it well within their security requirements.
Yes. One more question is like, is it allowed to have multi-processing, like running more runtimes at the same time?
I'm sorry?
Is it allowed to have a multi-processing, like more runtimes of the robot?
But they have to run on separate robots. So every robot runs on a particular virtual machine, right? And of course, it can't be running two on the same machine at the same time because they would be clashing with each other. But you can have as many robots running on virtual machines in parallel, and obviously a lot of customers do that, especially if you have a lot of high volume processes and you need to meet those SLAs. Then yes, our RPA key is more than capable of running multiple processes at the same time. You're only limited to how many bots you purchase or how much bots your license allows you and how many virtual machines you set up to run that. But we have customers running 30, 40, 50 robots And therefore, they can run 30, 40 processes at the same time. And then, of course, each robot can run as many processes as the robot's available. So if you have a process that only runs for a few hours each day and you have 10 of those, they could run on one robot, the same robot, as long as they don't have to run at the same time.